Welcome to Season 2 of the Pivot Point podcast. This season, we are featuring candid conversations. We're interviewing industry experts and leaders about candid conversations they've had that involve gender in some way. They're going to fill us in on what happened, what prevented them from addressing it, the risks they took in that conversation, why they chose to say something, and how they handled it, and what happened next. Stay tuned for Pivotal Stories, a Positive Change. In the studio, we have Don Wettrick. He is the Innovation Coordinator at Noblesville High School and author of Pure Genius, Building a Culture of Innovation and Taking 20% Time to the Next Level. Wettrick has worked as middle school and high school teacher, educational and innovation consultant, CEO, and podcast host. He is also the founder of Startup Ed, an organization dedicated to help transform the school culture towards innovation and enable student-led entrepreneurship. Don has lectured across the U.S., Europe, South America, Africa about collaboration, social media use, and work environments that enable innovation. Through his travel, he has worked with hundreds of entrepreneurs from Silicon Valley to Ghana and speaks to bring that entrepreneurial mindset into our classrooms. His podcast has featured some of the most successful entrepreneurs, authors, and thought leaders in the world focusing on educational change. Most importantly, Don works with educators, students, and entrepreneurs to bring innovation and collaborative school skills into education. Welcome, Don.
Hello. Thank you for the nice long intro. Sorry about that.
Oh, gosh. Well, I think it definitely speaks to your passion for education and collaboration and the culture of which diversity and innovation thrive. So we're excited to have you on, a totally different vantage point you're going to provide for our listeners today. And as all our guests kick off, we have them share a candid conversation. So a time when, gender, equality, diversity, maybe Kate was a little uncomfortable, or maybe it was a situation where you navigated beautifully. But regardless, we would love for you to share a story with our listeners.
Yeah, I mean, as far as inclusion, and it's kind of interesting, I think one of the biggest deficits we have in education, especially at underserved communities, is the ability to have choice and the ability to have permission. The major point of school is to acquire skills so you can be employable or start your own business. However, we keep getting further and further away from that. If you ask people, what's the purpose of school? People are like, to get into college. And that's just not a valid answer now. Because even what is the point of college is to get you, a job. And so, what relevant skills are we trying to promote in our kids? Well, the sit down and be quiet and be subservient isn't working anymore. That's not an employable skill. And unfortunately, where you see that at the most, proud level is at the underserved schools. They pride themselves on the compliance model. Now, don't get me wrong. I love safe schools. I don't like school violence. However, giving them a time and giving them some choice in their own curriculum is not even heard of. Mm-hmm. And it's really not heard of at the, actually it's at the bookends. The really high level school that they have a perfect SAT score. They have this awful word called tradition. And then you have the underserved schools that they just want to make sure that they had fewer suspensions this year. Mm. It's time that we start looking at choice in school. This isn't a public versus private school. Like, I'm a public school teacher. But our class is called Innovation and Open Source Learning. The class is, you have some things to learn that are relevant, but the rest of the school year is you're open sourcing your learning. Who do you want to learn from and learn with? That has to be a part of things moving forward. Mm-hmm. Because the amount of things we don't teach is vast. Mm-hmm. Like, we don't technically teach investing in IRAs or Bitcoin mining. We don't teach that. But if you had a passion and you had an interest, why shouldn't you be given an hour a day to pursue those things?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I like this whole idea of choice and what's missing, especially in the most underserved areas, like you said, that tend to be the most diverse. Open sourcing learning, self-driven learning techniques and curriculum. Interesting. So as you think about this element of choice, Don, and from your kind of vantage point in education, being in the public school system, driving innovation, what do you think it takes to open up the door to more of those choices so that people do have a voice in how they
Well, I mean, this is the hard part. I mean, you either have to convince the school or the school administrator or parents.
Mm.
Like the first thing we all have to agree to is that so many parents think that the only way you're going to succeed is if you somehow go to college and study in a major that won't be relevant in 2 years, that's somehow going to make you successful.
Right.
Like if you can't Google some of this stuff, like automation and machine learning is going to make like several careers obsolete in the next 5 years. So then like we're just having a conversation. Like how, like my favorite thing to ask a lot of school administrators is, what is the point of school? Oh, to prepare them for the future. Fine. Please point to me some things that are like making our kids future ready.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, this is not to bash on education. For you to be innovative, you have to have an understanding of history. You have to understand basic math. You have to be able to read, to write. These things are still cool. I love them. Mm-hmm. But giving them that time of the day of like, if your student, like, you know what's big right now is esports and streaming on, like Fortnite is huge.
I've heard about that.
I mean, there are people now building entire careers around Fortnite. Teachers would laugh at me if I said we should give time to our kids to learn Fortnite. And yet, that is a valuable skill.
Right.
You know, blogging 101, how to run a good YouTube channel,
mm-hmm.
how to start a podcast. You're not going to find any of those in traditional curriculum.
Yep. Yeah, and to your point about automation replacing some of the more traditional jobs that you may have gone to college for, or you may have done specialized skill training in, being obsolete and being replaced by automation and technology, open sourcing that learning so that people are more future ready. I'm curious, Don. So speaking to kind of some of the gaps in choice and missing areas for those that are underserved, what do you see in your classroom? I'm curious from a diversity perspective, different schools of thought around, even like from the classroom, right? What do you see from the students?
Well, I mean, so I've created a culture now, so I'm getting a little bit more of a balance. But when I first started off, I was begging for girls because the rumor got out that it was a tech class, which it's not. But girls feel insecure sometimes about being techie. They think that,
sure.
Oh, I don't know how to code. I'm not asking you to code. So, but by us being really transparent, us, doing a lot of media pieces, us doing interviews, it's kind of broken that stigma. Yeah. So now I've got a pretty balanced classroom. Ironically enough, I say though that I still attract more C and D students than the straight A students. Okay. Because they're like, a lot of times the kids that are smart, but they don't do school as well, mm-hmm. they find a home here and they know it.
Yeah. 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 They're not, you think about the AB students that are good at rules, at memorization, of, making sure they've checked those boxes. More innovative thinkers may think outside those parameters and may not be that, typical book smart.
Yeah, although I will say this only because you brought it up, like the term thinking outside the box, I know more kids that know how to be really clever within it.
Right.
And those are really awesome people. Yep. People that know the rules and know how to bend them a little bit and think, like within that framework.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting, all the focus on girls in STEM. Nowadays, I'm sure you hear a lot about this, and you absolutely speak to the challenges of how we socialize young girls in our country, how we kind of don't push them into those techie coding types of jobs, although there's wonderful things out there like Girls Who Code and a plethora of resources focused on this. I'm curious, as you've you say we're early begging for girls and now have more of a balance in the classroom, what do you think, other than you said transparency and education, what do you think got you over that hump?
Giving kids a chance to fail.
Okay.
Like the only thing I have against you said your words, the push to get more kids and girls in STEM. Well, what if the push doesn't work? That's mm-hmm. okay. Like if a girl says almost the reverse pressure of you should like STEM, what if they don't? and I'm okay with that too. Yeah. If they try something, like how many people change their majors in college? 70%?
Right.
If you give time in the school day to say, hey, try this. If you don't like it, that's cool too.
Right. Yeah.
And so girls that are like, that find out that they dabble in tech and they're like, wait, I kind of like this. Awesome. Keep going.
Yep.
Girls that try some tech and like, this is not for me. That's cool too.
Sure. Yeah, I can absolutely speak to that as somebody that I think even had there been an emphasis back in the 80s when I was in school,
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it would have been something I would have been naturally inclined or probably as talented to do. However, you do strike an interesting balance here where, as girls, that risk aversion, we don't want to take as many risks or, what if I'm not perfect at that? We tend to, self-critique a bit more. Whereas boys are like, hey, what's the worst that could happen here? And so giving them that free spirited kind of safety net, if you will, to the chance to fail. What's the worst that could happen? You're going to learn this. If you don't end up enjoying it, then you can always take another class next year, next semester. But yeah, it in decreasing the barriers to entry there around perfection. Okay.
Yeah.
Don, and kind of wrapping up, share with us, how can our listeners follow you, engage with some of the work that you're doing?
So I'm always pretty active on Twitter at Don Wettrick, but I'll have to say I have found that in the last 3 months, LinkedIn has been the most supportive, upbeat, hungry group. I post a lot of what we do in the classroom there, which, by the way, I'm being sincere when I say this. When I tell people all that we do in the classroom, don't believe me. Assume that I'm lying. Because anybody can make up stuff. I highly, highly recommend that you see what we post on video, and then when I post, I'll usually include the students themselves. Click on their profile, ask them what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
I really, really, really am proud of what they do, but I'd also like it if they can speak for themselves. And we kind of give them a platform in which to launch. So if you follow me, that's awesome, but follow my kids, they're even better.
Yeah, that's great. And certainly LinkedIn, Twitter, your website, we can find ways to connect with you and the students. So yeah, because I love that because, a term like diversity is something I'm speaking about and writing about often. I think we think it has to be race or gender, but what you're sharing is a whole nother wrinkle of diversity. Young people age, right? Diversity. And I find when I'm working with young people, I learn so much more from them and the vantage point they have simply because I'm not around them as much. Besides my own family, the young students in your classroom could be a really great learning point for a lot of our listeners out there to connect with people that are different than you, that have different thoughts than you, that have divergent thinking. And that's really where great innovation and ideas come from.
Yes.
Well, thank you, Don, for being with us today. We enjoyed hearing about the great work you're doing, building that culture of innovation there, and supporting young people in such a noble and just excellent, inclusive way. So appreciate you. Thanks for being on today. In our studio, we have Aliya Janjua today, and she is a devoted leader of over 17 years in the finance and tech industry. It's specializing in customer service. She's led impactful search through new tools for leadership development, implemented programs that illuminate paths for advancement. Learning is a lifelong passion of hers, and she is constantly pursuing knowledge to empower her team. I've personally experienced this with Aliya. And through managing over several different customer support teams and technology spanning the Advent product suite and developing global systems there, she's nurtured her belief that growth is found outside the comfort zone. Could not agree more. Ultimately, mentorship is her greatest purpose within her professional network and beyond. She believes that education is a right, not a privilege, and that everyone should have equal opportunity no matter where they are in the globe. Through her work at She Can and Tech Women, she witnesses every day that small steps take a lasting impact. Thus, the fusion of her focus in leadership and mentorship has led her to launch her podcast series, Confessions of Successful Asian Women. Yes. The podcast helps connect communities of those who lead similar journeys, provide candid career advice, and offer an intimate space to share unique experiences. Her hope is that this platform, her leadership, her mentorship work will serve to connect, share, and inspire women to dream bigger. Welcome, Aliya.
Thank you so much, Julie, for the wonderful introduction.
Absolutely. Well, it's a pleasure to have you on. So, we had the chance to connect through some work you were doing with your Women's Leadership Initiative at Advent. So, we did some webinars and we did some in person work on influence and confidence. It was so fun to see your team and your tribe around you grow through that experience. So, I'm curious to hear the backstory on where you've been with that and where you're going. But before we do that, as we do with all our guests, we'd love to hear about a candid conversation you've had around gender in the workplace.
Thank you, Julie. Candid conversation, something that I still struggle with, but I've gotten much better at over the course of many years. And they say practice makes perfect. So a conversation that I want to bring up, and that was probably a defining moment in my own career too, is, I'm a leader. I've been in a leadership role for the last 12 years of my career. And about 5 years ago, we went through a big reorganization. And right around that time, we had groups coming together, we had some consolidation. I found myself leading a new set of people. And I had one direct report where I had to help him through change management. Not only help him through change management, but also help him with a move as well. We were situated on different floors. And at this point, we wanted to bring the whole support team together on one floor. And I asked him to make the move. And I felt like he didn't hear me. And he kept challenging me. And so we had this conversation a couple of times where I stated all the reasons as to why we were making the change, why we wanted the whole support team sitting together, listed out all the benefits. And even then, he did not agree with my decision and challenged me. But then finally, he did it. And fast forward from that conversation, we were at an event. This is an after hours event, and he had a little bit too much to drink. And we had a very candid conversation. And at that point, he mentioned to me that he felt like I had a tendency to repeat myself too much. And that was very telling, because in that moment, I felt a little, belittled. It's always painful to hear feedback, especially constructive
Sure.
feedback in that way. But at the same time, it was very useful to me as well. And for me, what I realized that I felt like he wasn't hearing me, so I had to repeat myself. And I also
Mhm.
felt like I needed to get his buy-in for that decision. But what really should have happened was that I should have stuck firm to my decision and, say, you know what, you're going to move. And so it led me to really focus on my communication, and it led me to really develop myself in that area. And because of that conversation, that late night conversation, it was painful feedback for me to hear, but at the same time, it led me into a different direction where I really invested in myself,
Mhm.
and I invested in my communication training. I joined Toastmasters. I joined these public speaking training workshops here in San Francisco, and I really made it a point and made it my mission to improve my communication skills.
Mhm.
And now it's led me to become more self-aware. I'm a parent. I've got 3 children, and sometimes, we as parents tend to repeat ourselves a lot with our kids, like do this, do this, do this, and we do it because we feel like they're not hearing us. But what really is happening is that they've heard us. They just don't want to do it, right?
Right.
So you need to figure out a different approach of how to influence others and how to get others to do things. Especially, you know, I I, I know that titles don't matter, hierarchy doesn't matter, especially in this day and age. We're all leaders. We're all serving each other. And so you really have to understand how to communicate communicate with others and really improve those interpersonal skills. And that was a big defining moment for me. And I'm really happy that I had that incident happen to me, because it's led me into a positive direction.
Yeah. Well, out of adversity comes strength and growth. And I think that story underscores that, because you could have easily taken that feedback really negatively. Woe is me. It could have been one of
Right.
those. But what I love, I mean, a few nuggets for our listeners there in that dialogue, Aliya, is, first, what women are really good at is we're good at communicating clearly, getting buy-in and being collaborative. And so I think you were demonstrating some of those skills with emphasizing the why behind the change and the benefits, what's in it for him. However, after like the third time of sharing it, he saw it as repetition, but he just wasn't, like you said, he wasn't bought in. He didn't want to. Um,
Right.
and so, speaking to changing your approach and how you took that feedback as a gift and propelled your career forward and did self development to find other ways to influence people, I think it's just such a great story of personal growth and triumph. And it's interesting because, as someone that studies gender and the communication dynamics, as we were prepping for this, men communicate more directly with each other. You mentioned he was used to probably working with mostly men and having a male boss. And so,
Yes.
you're
Yes.
moving
Yes,
5 minutes from now.
exactly. That was a big change for him, because he was led by a male boss. And then lo and behold, this woman um, is his new boss, and she's a minority woman too. So there is a lot of background with that as well. But
Mm-hmm.
I think that the key takeaway that I took from it was communication and
Mm-hmm.
style, and something that I needed to be more self-aware of as
Yeah.
well on my own.
Yeah. Well, and communication is a great strength of yours today. I can certainly see that. So it's out of those experiences we learned. So what a great candid conversation. So digging into your passion and your podcast, I'm curious, how did you get your podcast started, and what kind of stories are you sharing there?
Thank you for asking that question. So I started Confessions of Successful Asian Women back in 2016. And the reason why I started it was because I felt like there was a missing platform for Asian women to share their stories. I'm an avid podcast listener. I love listening to the Tim Ferriss show. I
Mhm.
listened to the Marie Forleo show. I've listened to, all the big podcasts that are out there. And I realized that most of these podcasts were by men for men. Yet
So
here was this
true.
woman, this Pakistani American woman, listening to this podcast and looking for advice. And so I noticed this big void, and ever since I was a young girl, I've always been really curious in other people's lives. When I used to be a young girl on the playground, instead of playing on the swings, I would be chatting it up with the parents of the children waiting there, and I would ask questions like, "What are you going to do on the weekend? What are you making for dinner?" And I remember one time where one parent came back to me and said, "Oh yeah, you asked too many questions. You need to be a reporter." And that was a real defining moment. But I went through my high school and college, and that kind of went on the wayside. And then over time, like this whole uh, curiosity got rekindled, and I really wanted to feature the stories of these amazing women that I'm surrounded by, who have broken a lot of barriers. I come from an
Mhm.
Asian background. My family is from Pakistan. They were immigrants, and when they came here, my dad came here in 1970. My mom came here in 1975. I was born and raised in San Francisco, and I still have a lot of that culture, that traditional culture where I was the oldest of three girls, so I was taught to be obedient. I was, encouraged not to rock the boat. And so that was like my upbringings. Transitioning into my career, like I had to change a lot of my upbringing and be more bold and brave and to speak up
Mm.
and take a seat at the table. And I feel like so many women, so many Asian women come from that background where they've had to challenge a lot of the values, right? And
Mhm.
to really learn to take a seat at the table and nobody was telling their stories. So that's what inspired me to start the podcast. And since then, I've interviewed over 30 women. These are remarkable women who are some of the first to do things. Like, not all of them are doctors. Some of them are entrepreneurs. Some of them are they are teachers. They're just, they're playing these amazing roles, and they have these amazing stories that I wanted to feature.
Oh, what a great story of your own growth and shifting into the workplace. And like you said, the values growing up that tend to be more consistent with Asian culture, although I would argue American women very much the same. Be quiet, be pleasing, don't be bossy. Those are the
Right.
messages we send young girls, and then we expect them to just suddenly change overnight when they enter the workplace. Oh, take a seat at the table, speak up. And it's like, well, that's not consistent with what I was told growing up. So you're asking me to be something different.
Exactly. And that was a big shift for me too, because I came from an all-girl family. I was the oldest of three girls, very traditional upbringing. My parents very valued education a lot, so they always encouraged me to go further. But then transitioning from that world into the workplace, where you are rubbing shoulders with men, where you might find yourself being the only woman in a room full of men, where sports is being talked about, football, baseball.
Right.
And I'm like, I didn't grow up watching any of that, right? So really figuring myself out, and being able to confidently sit at the table and be a part of that discussion, it was something that was very terrifying. And I always felt like I was um, excluded. I felt like I didn't belong. And over time, I've learned to hold my own and to, contribute in ways where I'm an expert. Maybe it's food, because I'm a big foodie, or whether it's like something that I heard on the radio, NPR, whatever it is. So to really have to figure out and navigate myself, because, growing up, I never saw myself as a leader. I was always the follower. And when I got tapped on the shoulders to lead, I had a little bit of imposter syndrome. I felt like, me of all people lead? No way. And, and then over my career, like I kept rising in my role, and kept getting promoted. And then I really realized that, if I don't believe it myself, you know, the others are not going to see it either. So I have to believe I'm a leader first in order for others to see it in me. And so there's a lot of deep work that I have to do, and a lot of like rewiring of my brain to get myself to believe that I deserve to be in the spot that I'm in.
What a journey. That's so great. And like we said about rewiring our brains, because female brain is different. We are biologically different than men. And of course, how we're socialized and from a young age also impacts that. But we can always make choices to rewire. Behavior takes time, though, to remap, to learn new behaviors. So it's being patient with that and having that journey. So you've been an Advent now for 18 years, and you've climbed through the ranks in technology as a female leader. Curious, what's your take on what it's like to be one of the minority female leaders in tech? And where do you see, from your vantage point in Silicon Valley, where do you see tech going with diversity?
Well, I've been very fortunate at Advent, because I was very lucky to have a mentor, a sponsor who really believed in my development, who, encouraged me to do things, who gave me opportunities to lead. And I'm also very lucky that, we have a women leader in our development organization. She is our senior VP of development, and because she's leading that organization, she has other female leaders reporting into her. So I see a shift, especially within our own company. But it's always tilted towards more men. I mean, that's always been the case, right? And we are looking at ways in how we can promote more women into leadership roles. And especially in my organization, in support, technical support is historically been mostly male, heavy. And now I'm really making a point to hire for diversity, not meaning that diversity doesn't mean just like ratios of men versus women, but diversity of experience, diversity of background, etc. So I've been fortunate here at Advent. I mean, what I'm seeing in the industry is that, especially in tech in the Bay Area, there's been some tough conversations, right? There were some things that were coming up to surface where, we felt like we were making progress
Yep.
with gender equality, but there wasn't that progress that was being made. And
Yep.
so it's really inspired a lot of these companies to have that conversation and to evaluate, what's going on and how they can change. And, I think it's the first step. I think the Me Too movement is another one too, in terms of just women feeling safe in mostly male dominated workplaces, right? And so it has inspired conversation. It has raised awareness, but I still feel like there's a long way to go.
Yep.
The very beginning, and we need to keep. I think it's important for women to support each other, for women to have communities, and that's why I have this women's group at Advent. And we've been doing this. We've had this program for the last several years. It started out as a grassroots initiative, and over time, because we have Karen Geiger, who is our senior VP of development, she's the sponsor, and we're able to invite leaders like you to give training, so that can help everyone grow in their professional development.
Mm-hmm.
And so I really value this community that exists because we need to support each other. We need to create these safe, non-judgment spaces where women can be open about the challenges that they're facing, and then also help them grow as well.
Yeah, and realize you're not alone. Someone else's
Right,
challenge. There were
exactly.
so many similar challenges as we brainstormed and strategized together, and the power of us coming together as women is something I firmly believe in as well. So, kudos to you for growing that group. I mean, what a mighty tribe you have there at Advent, and the fact that they're willing to invest in a women's leadership, development. Resources and workshops and things that can help close these gaps, because simply hiring diverse talent, like you said, isn't going to solve the problem. That's been the focus for several years now, and we're
Right.
not seeing that gap close. And I think too, to your point about Silicon Valley and the perception that things are changing, it's quite the contrary. It was actually better in the '80s than it is now, which is, I think, when I saw that data from Brotopia, the book that came out earlier this year. Wow. I mean, I had no idea that graduation rates had slid so much in computer science. And how do we, the STEM focus is great from young girls, bringing them in, but how do we close the gaps with the positions mid-career and early career that we have open today? So,
Right. Yeah, no, and I think the big factor here is confidence too, and it's something that you teach as well as part of your curriculum. Confidence is huge because as women, we feel like we need to have all the skills in
mm-hmm.
order to raise our hand for that job, right?
Yep.
We feel like we need to be these super women, perfect in everything. But we're human, and you're not going to have perfection. And being okay with that and accepting that is huge.
Mm-hmm.
And being and just giving ourselves a break too. I feel
Right.
like there's a lot of self-imposed pressure on us to be the best and to be the super mom and be the super employee, but it's okay to take a break, and it's okay to take time off, and it's okay not to know everything,
Yep.
right? So it's humbling, and that's something that I've had to learn the hard way over time, where you know what, all you need to relax, stop. So it's
Time out.
yeah, time out. It's exactly, and I unfortunately do see a lot of burnout happening
Yeah,
with women, and that's why they're leaving their careers, because
exactly.
family comes first. That's just a non-negotiable for a lot of people, and I
Mhm.
and I totally agree with that.
Well, and I think for men, I think if you ask them, they would say the same thing. I mean, your list
Exactly.
of priorities, family is probably the number one. I mean, it doesn't have to be, but I find it's equal between men and women that are parents or
Exactly.
care about human connection. That's it. But how we treat working mothers versus working fathers is very different in most organizations. And that's the crux of the problem when the woman's
Yes.
expected to shuttle kids around and pick them up. And men, to most degree, are not. And they're expected to be able to work late, which also is not fair to them. So,
yeah. And it's interesting because I work with a colleague who is a lead parent because his wife works in the afternoons and he has to leave at 2:00 every day. And, sometimes it's frowned upon, right? Like, why are you leaving? So I know that it's something that both genders face.
yep.
And it's something that we need to change as a culture around
Mm-hmm.
like
Yeah.
parenting and employees who have other commitments as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that that's the inclusive workplace of the future.
Exactly.
That embraces fatherhood and motherhood equally, because I would argue men's roles as fathers is critically just as important as women as mothers. And there's a few things we can do early on that are different. I understand that. However, in most cases, children need two parents, and having two parents available and parking some of the judgments and stereotypes we place on working parents would really bode some really diverse, inclusive work environments. So, oh, yeah. This has been fascinating. Thank you for so many different perspectives. We got a tech perspective, a parenthood perspective, an Asian American woman perspective. I mean, this has been client perspective. It's just been so great. So thank you for sharing your time with us. We will link to your podcast in the show notes, but please let our listeners know verbally how best to follow you.
Yes. So I have a few different ways where you can follow me. You can follow me on Twitter at Aliya34. And I also have my website, which is Confessions of Successful Asian Women. I know it's a mouthful, but that's the website. And the podcast is on iTunes as well. And you can also follow me on the Facebook page. But thank you so much, Julie, for this wonderful conversation. I really enjoyed it. And thank you for creating the space to feature different perspectives.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Pivot Point podcast and our candid conversation. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to share it with a friend or subscribe to our channel. You can also follow us at Next Pivot Point on social media, and check out our website for free, amazing resources to support your candid conversation journey. It's www.nextpivotpoint.com. Thank you.